Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our friend, Barry Glick.
Got that one, huh?
How's it going, Barry?
So you didn't compare me to Ovechkin, huh? Hi, Matt.
Hey, Barry.
You've got a fact checker here?
We got a fact checker. Got it. Did he used to work for you?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming out, Barry.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thanks to Startup Grind and Alpha and Verizon.
Yeah. We're actually very honored for having you here. I mean, the thing is that you haven't got that much coverage, which was like, man, this is going to be a gold mine tonight.
It's an exclusive.
Yeah, it's exclusive.
Startup Grind exclusive.
Yeah, and you know, here's a very interesting fact here. When we had a panel here in this very forum, we had the former CEO of MapQuest in the panel, and guess who was in the audience? Barry was in the audience. And so afterwards he told me, like, did you know the founder of MapQuest was in your audience? I was like, what? Because I think you were doing fact checking. You're like, yeah, that's right. No, it's not really.
No, he's a great guy.
He's a great guy. Okay, great. But we want to get right into the story because, like, I feel like this is the original unicorn story. AOL, that was probably one of their big acquisition that made a lot of news. And you know, very few people realized that was in DC, and you were behind the helm. And so we would like to start with you first. So I'm going to go way back. Let's go first. Like, you know, let's just, you know, where were you born? Where were you raised? What did your parents do? And then maybe talk about your first entrepreneur experience, if you had one. So let's start with you.
Okay, with me. Yeah, it does go way back. You're right about that. So I was born in Brooklyn before it was what it is today, right? My parents were immigrants. My parents came over to the U.S. after World War II. They were actually displaced people. They were in displaced persons camp. Neither of my parents nor anyone in my family had ever gone to college. Oh, I did have one uncle who went to medical school. But my parents didn't go to college. They had really, my father came across with very little money. He had an uncle who helped him. So it was a very typical immigrant story.
Which country?
Which country did he come from?
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia, okay.
Yep, so it was overrun, you know, as so many countries were back then. So soon after, you know, they came over here, they met each other, they got married, and they had me. That was kind of the highlight of their life. No, I'm joking. My father, with help from his uncle, again, a common story, my uncle had a couple of grocery stores that catered to what they call the carriage trade. In other words, cater to rich people in Manhattan, and in places like Greenwich Village and the Upper West Side. And my father opened a store as well on the Upper West Side, and became a successful little chain of stores. So, I mean, my first experience was working in the stores, and we were open 7 days a week, which of course stores are, and it was family run. No one really wanted to work on Sunday because that was my father's day off. So when I got to 16 years old, I was put in charge of Sunday stores.
Okay.
So I had to make money on Sunday, and I said, hey, I have a little disadvantage because in those days in New York City, you couldn't sell beer until after noon on Sunday. So I lost half of my day's beer sales, but we did fine. So we did delivery on bikes. Back in those days, that sounds like something new, but that was something old. So that was my kind of
entrepreneurial
growing up. I went to Stuyvesant High School, which is a high school, you know, where you get admitted based on scores.
That's like TJ.
That's like TJ. I was there. It was an all-male school. I was there in the first year that we had our first women who were able to come to Stuyvesant. And then I went away to college, and so on.
So my first question, that's great. So just before we start, hashtag startup grind. You don't have a Twitter account, right?
Yes, I do.
You do? Okay, what is it? At?
You really want to know? It's all of my accounts, which are the same name I had when I had accounts on an IBM 360, so on, are GeoBarto, GeoBarto. I've used that name, so that's my Twitter account, that's my Gmail account.
Sorry again,
GeoBarto.
Okay, got it. GeoBarto. Okay.
Right?
So, yeah, GeoBarto.
And I think it was seven characters, right?
1, 2,
For
3,
Tran
4,
compliant.
5, 6, 7.
It's, yeah.
GeoBarto. So first, I wanted to first start out because the thing is we've had many founders here at Startup Grind, and I remember when we had Nigel Morris, and he's the co-founder of Capital One. I was like, hey,
Oh, wow.
what credit card do you use? So what map software do you use?
What map software do I use? Today, I primarily use Google.
Oh, okay. Moving on. Okay. So is there, you don't use MapQuest then?
I still occasionally will use it. If I'm looking for kind of an obscure place in the U.S. and I just want to see the surrounding area or something, I'll try MapQuest. But I've been using it, less and less. I'd like to be loyal.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah, there's less reason to do it. So.
No, that's right. I mean, when we asked Nigel, he's like, I don't have a Capital One card. I was like, wow. So you're not. So you're fine. You're fine.
It's not my own dog food anymore. I mean, I believe in eating your own dog food, but
okay, we'll get there. We'll get there. So because there's a lot of stories behind eating your own dog food here. So let's go after college. Talk about how it all started. Like, were you always into maps?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little about why were you fascinated with maps before you started your mapping company?
I thought about that. I've thought about that a lot, especially since I now have a grandson who is obsessed with maps. My son is obsessed with maps. I was kicked out of 3rd grade for etching maps on my wooden desk.
Wow.
So I had a serious problem with it, actually. And, my parents were like, hey, you should be a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, what are you going to do with maps? There's no way to make a living out of it. So that was my challenge. I took that as kind of a challenge, but I knew I loved it. I used the, of course, overused cliche term, my passion. It certainly has been, it's and still kind of is just a passion. I can't explain it. I really can't explain it.
So when did you decide? So the first company. So I couldn't get any information before this company, Spatial Data Science. Did you have a job before you started this company, Spatial Data Science? Okay.
Actually, you referred to it.
Okay.
You did refer to it. I had a job in Boston. That was my first job. We had there was a company, a software company called Systematics that did analysis of medical data. It was, while I was there, and I was just there for a short time, it was acquired by Equifax, who, some of you may have heard of because of their problem they had. But anyway, they were acquired by Equifax. We became owned by a big company, and my boss, my immediate boss, and 2 of his partners decided to spin out part of the company that was doing kind of analysis of marketing data, let's call it that. And they created a little company, and I joined that little company at that time. And we did the first kind of computer mapping of business data, where we took statistical data that the companies had, and we mapped it by plotting it on big CAD/CAM inkjet plotters, so that insurance companies and brokerage companies, could see how their sales territories were doing, and they subscribed to this service. And I thought, hey, and it was my idea, really. I mean, the 3 bosses who owned the company were they were the operating people, and they were the owners. Myself and a couple of technical guys were the ones who created this, and it created some conflict because we wanted to do some other things. They didn't really want to do that. they wanted more of a lifestyle business. So I said, hey, I'm going to go do something else.
Okay, so I want to pause there. So you looked for a company that kind of aligned with your passion with maps, or was it like, hey, there's a job, I got an offer, so now I want to go to start doing maps in this company?
No, somewhere in between. There was a company that had data, and it had data that was tied to stuff like zip codes and things that could be mapped, but they weren't into mapping.
Okay.
So I brought the mapping part of it, but I thought it was they had a good potential for it. And
so this is good. No, so this is kind of like the theme I'm trying to push here, but it's like, yeah, you guys are passionate about something, but there's a job offer, like, that's not really aligned with what I like. But if I can see 2 steps forward, say, well, I really like AI, I really like blockchain, I really like games, something, and then figure out, is there an opportunity to do a crossroad within that company?
That's right.
And that's what you pulled off, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yes.
And then that was kind of like a test bed for you.
Yeah.
To now do the spatial data science company, right?
Right, because in that, as a test bed, like you said, I had to, go talk to the customers and convince them and hear what they said, what their objections were, and what they're really looking for, what their needs were, what they'd be willing to pay for, what they weren't willing to pay for. So I felt pretty comfortable that I could, sort of transfer that to something I did on my own.
Okay, so then when you created spatial data science, which was a trip.
Well, we're missing something.
Oh, we are.
And,
okay.
Yeah, and this is this guy knows about it, so I can't leave it out.
Okay, got it.
So I moved to DC from Boston. This was the year that Ronald Reagan became president in 1981. Reagan, as you know, shifted a lot of spending towards defense. He had a very huge buildup in defense spending, and I thought, and in terms of opportunities in the DC area, that seemed like a fairly fertile ground for applying technology related to location and mapping to defense and similar kinds of government needs. So I joined a company. This company, which was based in New York, gave me the opportunity to start my own office, which we did first in Maryland, then in Virginia. Started an office. There was another little office started in Virginia doing some different things, and we kind of merged those two together. So it was sort of halfway between starting my own company and working for someone.
Sure.
It was a business unit. We had some really, we had a lot of success doing some really cool things, which really advanced the state of the art in mapping technology. A lot of the investment money in those days came from DoD to do things like, build digital databases, do data analytics, computer vision, things like that, pattern recognition, image recognition, character recognition, stuff like that, AI, expert systems. And we were doing a lot of that stuff early on. So, I did that for a few years, about 3 or 4 years, I can't remember. And that company went public. So as I said, they were based in New York. So, I had a business unit. We were not owners of the company, and the people over here who contributed to the success of the company did other things too, that allowed it to go public. We got very little. We got, they made millions of dollars. We made $10 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I said, after that experience, hey, let's really start our own company and do it ourselves.
Did that fuel you? So that gave you like fire under the butt, and you're like,
yeah.
I can do it too.
Yeah, I didn't. Without the laughing part.
Laughing part, like, oh, I can do it too. But that motivated you to start your own company, because this is actually a very common theme with past Startup Grind speaker. We call these intrapreneurs. Like, they are people who are working for the big companies like Capital Ones of the world, Marriott's, and things like that. And they're like, wow, I've learned all this stuff here, but now I want to go off on my own.
Yeah, it's not just learning it, but first of all, we built up a business. We were running ourselves, so we became comfortable with that. And then we saw how these other, the senior management at the parent company, how they, kind of were able to go public and thought, hey, it's not that, out of reach, put it that way. Once you've seen it done, and you've lived through it, watching other people do it, you think, hey, I can do that. Too. Of course, a lot of things have to go right, but it gave me the confidence to start my own company.
So I want to kind of like fast forward here because I eventually want to get to the MapQuest story, but no. This is really important because the thing is like there's a lot of us who are kind of. So when he said that when Reagan was elected president, like I saw a lot of faces who are like, I wasn't even born. like a lot of people are like, I wasn't even born.
1981,
But the point is that this theme is a recurring theme. It doesn't matter if you were in the 1970s, 80s, 90s. It's a recurring theme. Everybody goes through that. It's today, 2018. Someone's going through this right now. And so the point here is that it's not too late. And actually, Mark Andreessen had said this. Like, some young kid asked him, "Hey, I want to do my startup. What do I do? Do I just make my startup?" And he says, "No, work for a mid-sized technology company first, and preferably like a known one. So if you're here in DC, would be like like an Optoro or like any FrameBridge or any of the companies that are doing pretty well now.
Right.
And then go off on your own and then do a startup, which that's what you did. And when you started spatial data science, you were like early 20s, right?
Mid-20s.
Mid-20s. Yeah. Okay. So
late 20s.
So when you started this, you created spatial data science, which was a trip routing software.
No.
No?
No.
Okay. Oops.
No.
Told you there was that much information on the internet.
So what we were doing, we were kind of building software systems for the government in this other company that I was mentioning. So I kind of had the idea that hey, companies, businesses need a lot of the same kind of thing. They need to understand location of where their customers are and where the opportunities are and how to efficiently move things around and how to visualize the stuff on a map. So I thought, let's take that technology, similar technology, which we had done on the government side, let's bring it onto the commercial side and address some of the issues, some of the problems with that technology. So that was the premise of spatial data science.
Okay.
Because at that point, there was some mapping software that is kind of now called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, which had to do with city planning and natural resources, but there was really nothing for businesses, kind of commercial use.
Commercial use, right?
Commercial
You took
use.
a government
Yes.
user base, now commercialize it.
Right, with a similar kind of technology. Similar, so now the problems are different, and it had to be honed or customized for the market, but what helped me get started at that point was because of this relationship I had on the government side, the National Mapping Division of the U.S. Geological Survey, which is the main civilian mapping agency in the U.S., they were asked by Business Week, which was a big business magazine in those days, owned by Newsweek. Business Week magazine, which is like Fortune or Forbes, they decided they were going to do a story on mapping for business. And they went and talked to the head of the National Mapping Division of USGS as an expert in mapping, and he said to them, hey, you should go talk to this Barry Glick guy. He just started a company that's going to try to do that. And so they talked to me, and they featured me in the article, and we were like a month old as a company, and there was a feature article, and after that happened, the phone started ringing, and we got calls from Fortune 500 companies who said, hey, we've got this issue, maybe you could help us with sales territory management or some other things that involve mapping and location. So that really helped us get off the ground.
And so that's when it turned into this trip routing software?
We're getting, yes.
Okay.
Well, almost.
No, because I want to get to the point, because like you got
Yes.
so much notoriety that, I mean, you were talking at one point with Bill Gates and Scott McNeely, like you were talking with Microsoft to use your software for their Salesforce, right?
Well,
And stop looking at him because like, he's like, yeah,
no,
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 that's right.
look over here. Well, Scott McNeely, I mean, I don't know, people here probably don't.
That's Sun Microsoft, Microsystems founder.
Sun Microsystems,
Sun
yeah.
Microsystems, yeah.
You know, he was also, they were very involved. In fact, they also got their start on the government side of the business because really, you know, for powerful microcomputers in those days, the government was willing to pay, you know, significant money for that kind of sophistication and computing power and you know, so he targeted that, and we helped him because, you know, with image processing and image analysis, image visualization, you need power in your computers, and you know, he was, of course, they were there in Santa Clara, California, and we were here, and I remember saying to him one day, or saying to Sun, you know, we need a little white paper to describe, you know, what you guys do, and I was expecting, I don't know, a paragraph or whatever. He sent me like a 20-page, single-spaced, you know, paper detailed, you know, of how, you know, the architecture of the Sun Microsystems and why it's so much better than. I was so impressed with him and you know, and that company. They really did a great job. But anyway, and Bill Gates. I mean, Microsoft has been interested in mapping from the beginning. They bought a company. Which I also wanted to buy. They bought a mapping company in the UK, a little software company, which did routing, trip routing kind of stuff. But Microsoft has never, you know, some of you may know that there was something called Bing Maps, which they just killed. They've been trying to
They
do.
also killed. Oh, no,
Yeah, they also killed
a lot of other.
a lot of other.
Google just killed Google Plus, but that's different.
That's a
Okay,
different thing. Yeah, not yeah. So anyway, yeah, Microsoft has been really interested in this stuff for a long time. Bill Gates has a personal interest in mapping. I know that.
Yeah, yeah. And then eventually you were selling to big clients like Pfizer and AAA.
Right.
And so let's talk about that because like when I hear your story, like I can plug your story into so many stories that are happening now, right? Like AI is going through the same thing, you know. It's a new technology. Government, you know, are doing a lot of innovation. Let's go privatize it, or let's go commercialize it. Blockchain. There's so many different technologies. That's why I wanted to go through this step by step, because hopefully people in this room will say, you know what, like history repeats itself, right? And how do I get, you know, to a company that's valuable that, you know, 1.1 billion is a lot of money, but like back then that was like ton of money, right? So
Well,
how do you make a valuable company?
Yeah, let me maybe, you know, kind of address that from 100,000 feet or 50,000 feet. So, you know, we were by necessity a project-based company because, you know, we didn't have, you know, we didn't have a huge bank account to be able to spend internal money on developing a product. Plus, you know, frankly, we didn't know what product we would actually, you know, develop to sell. So, you know, we did projects, the companies funded them, we delivered, you know, a working system, they paid us and we made some profit on it, but, you know, we always did projects that contributed to our technology base with the idea that, you know, eventually, you know, we're going to find something repeatable that we could sell multiple times so we wouldn't be a project business anymore. So that's when the story gets to trip routing, which became kind of our, you know, our initial product that was a totally different business model for us.
Like productizing something, right?
Well, we went, you guys, you know, the older people here remember the days when there were auto clubs, and the auto clubs marked up maps when people wanted to do it. You know, when your grandparents want to do a trip from, you know, Boston to Florida, AAA would take a bunch of maps. They would actually physically pull them and mark them up with a magic marker, assemble them in a little book, and mail them. It was a very expensive, labor-intensive process.
How much was that?
$10.
$10
per map. So we had the idea, you know, help from, you know, some smart people who I worked with and knew, and, you know, had the idea that we could automate that. You know, common story, we can automate that and have the computer spit out the maps and the routes and, you know, avoid a lot of these manual labor costs. So, we went to the automobile clubs who were spending the money, and I think this is an important lesson, because is this a no-brainer? We'll take your $10 you're spending and we'll cut it down, we'll charge you $2. We'll show you here, sign right here. Guess what? They weren't that, they didn't jump on it right away. So we said, look, well, I should back up. Initially we said, you guys pay us to do the software development and we'll deliver the software to you. And they said, no, we're not paying you. You deliver this system to us, show us that it works, and we'll pay you $2 for every trip you generated that's acceptable. You pay for all the supplies and the consumables and blah, blah, blah. And we'll do, so it was a totally different model for us. So we needed to upfront do the development ourselves, on our own dime, basically. Invest in this stuff, invest in the hardware, because we installed the stuff at the auto clubs. So I went looking for a partner, and that's where I partnered with a large company, R. Donnelly and Sons, which in those days was the largest printing company.
$4 billion mapping company.
Printing company.
Printing company, right. Publishing, map publishing.
$8 billion, I think today, printing company. They had a mapping business, a small mapping business with print maps, and I said, what if we digitize your maps that are sitting on these dusty shelves? You're not making any money off of them. We'll digitize them, scan them, we'll stick them into our system. The system will churn out these maps, and the customers will pay $2, and we'll give you half.
And the reason why you went to R. Donnelly is because they arguably had the biggest print library.
They had a collection of all the maps.
To digitize it?
Right, exactly. And,
Yep.
and we went to Rand McNally, which is another big one, and they said, no way we're going to let you do that. And so, R. Donnelly put the money, and they invested, some money to allow us to do the development, and that's how that, that product got started. And we signed up every auto club in the U.S. So it's a small niche market, a small niche market, highly profitable, and a generator of recurring revenue. I mean, those are golden. It's not huge, but it's a great, thing to start with or to build off.
So this is really important. So I mean, you could have just said, we're going to go into the mapping industry. Like, how some people always have the big goal. It's like big hairy goal. It's like, okay, how are you going to do that, right?
Yeah.
You found a way to a niche where people are actually paying $10, and then you're like, I can do it for $2. You can still charge maybe the $10, but now you're making $8 profit. Maybe I don't know what that business. Okay, so you were making it cheaper, right? Cheaper?
Yeah, because it's a cost center for them because they charge an annual membership fee, like if you're a AAA member.
So this is good. B2B. Cost optimization, bringing down the cost for a big company, a $4 billion company, like, oh my God, let's do the math. It's not hard. We're spending this many millions, and then we put your technology and we spend this much money for development, we're going to save this much more in the long run. So that's the approach, niche, and then you broaden out.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So that was sort of how spatial data science was kind of launched a product and moved from being a project-based company to a product-based company. And it also established a relationship with this large company, the Fortune 500 company, Donnelly, which then led to the next company, Geosystems, which led to MapQuest. So
I'm always trying to do these parallels right now, like what's happening today. Look, how can we pull some insights? So AI obviously is a big. Right, like AI is basically we're trying to replace a human, right?
Yes.
Like we're spending $50,000 for this person to be on the phone to say something. If we're able to niche, something maybe like, okay, I'm doing support to call to see what my balance is. Do we need to hire a person for this, or can we now do it automated and save the company millions of dollars?
Yep.
So you have to constantly be doing that exercise, right?
Yes.
And that's just one example, but getting a niche.
And like you said, I think it's important that you know, it's not just an abstract thing like, you know, yeah, we can eliminate people and we can, you know,
Right.
it's got to be a very specific kind of, you know, thing that you're going to actually be able to do.
Right.
To, you know,
Right.
in other words, it's got to be concrete and targeted, and then the reception, you know, I think is very positive compared to a more abstract statement like, hey, AI is going to, you know, really make things a lot more efficient, and you'll be able to cut your staff by 40%
Right.
or whatever.
And so now you have a basis, which is now the precursor of this Geosystems Inc., right?
That's right.
So you've created, like, okay, now we've kind of proven this out. We have a business model. Okay, so tell us the next step here, because, like, what was the aha moment? You know, something happened around that time, right? The internet happened?
Yeah, I was going to say,
happened?
yeah, you just mentioned the aha moment when you said Mark Andreessen, because Netscape happened.
Okay.
So once Netscape happened, it wasn't the, you know, the internet was there, but, you know, the World Wide Web, that was the, you know, innovation in 1996, when you could actually kind of do things with graphics and interactively, you know, on the internet. There was HTML, right? So that changed things.
So I was kind of confused about the timing of this, but, like, when you decided to put your product onto the internet to kind of MVP, they call it MVP on the internet, to say, let's just put it out there to make our, I'm assuming it's a thick client. This is a software you had to install on your computer. With the internet, like, how can we now make this accessible on the internet?
Right.
So give us a thought process of what you're like, okay, we're going to put this on the internet. So then what? Like, why would we want to do that?
Well, initially.
I know it's obvious, but I'm saying, like,
no, it's not obvious.
Okay.
Because the reason that we did it was probably a stupid, well, not a stupid reason, but a trivial reason compared to the, you know, what turned out the opportunity was. The reason we did it was because we had salespeople calling on, you know, Fortune 500 companies, B2B stuff, and they were lugging along these big, we didn't have skinny laptops, they were lugging along
servers,
these
like big
luggable computers, PCs. They were lugging them along to be able to do demos, interactive demos. And, you know, some of our software engineers said, hey, you know, the internet with the World Wide Web, they won't have to, they could just connect to our servers back in the office, and, you know, the servers are doing the heavy lifting, and, you know, the PC then, running the browser, can do the demos without having to, you know, have the servers there, you know, present. So, hey, let's do that. So that's what we created a mapping demo system.
Which is mind-blowing, because when you're doing this, like, hey, salespeople don't want to lug around that big ass machine. Let's just give them an internet connection, and then they can do the demo there, right? And these
or even do the demo on customers' computers.
Right.
If
So
they're connected to
it
the
was
internet.
closed during that time. It was closed, and then your salespeople were like, "Wow, this is amazing! I don't have to, like, collect this thing. I can just go to the internet and then demo it there."
Yeah.
Okay, so then what happened?
Well, you know, we figured, hey, you know, it makes sense to have that be public. So, you know, there's a URL that, you know, anybody could get to. And then we noticed our server going down.
Okay, wait. No, this is a good one.
Oh, you want me to?
So how did you? Okay, wait. Because you just skipped a very important story here. So just like you had the Business Week journalists, you also got journalists from CNET and also Wired to help launch this URL, which was already built, which was really meant for the salespeople, and it was running off what? How many servers at that time when you launched it?
2 or 3.
2 or 3. Okay,
4,
2 or 3.
Yeah.
So then when they covered it, then what?
Then our servers went down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, basically the story was, you can imagine, the story was, hey, everybody in the world who has an who has a web browser, you can get maps of anywhere for free.
Right.
You know, this is wow. You know, so it just exploded. I mean, it literally exploded. We went from 4 servers to 8, from 8 to 16. We, borrowed money.
They kept on crashing. They kept on crashing.
Yeah.
You just like, oh my God, we can't keep these servers up.
Yep.
So how many servers did you end up having to finally get it to stable?
Oh, I don't remember.
200?
Do you remember, Matt? Yeah.
Okay, so
there were hundreds.
So it's 200. Okay.
Yes.
Like, can you imagine? You're like, okay, let's launch this. We have 3 servers. There's like literally millions of people wanting to try this.
The interesting thing is, and I think there's a lesson here, we had a competitor. We weren't the only, there was one competitor actually out in Silicon Valley. And that company, like us, was focused on B to B to C, meaning that, for example, if a company like Ford or Macy's or whatever, if they had a website, which everyone was starting to have, and they wanted to show a map of their stores, or they wanted to figure out, well, hey, I'm at this address, what's my closest store, or how do I get there? We would charge that company on a B to B to C basis to access our software on our servers. So we that was a part of our business plan. So
which Google's still doing.
Which Google's still doing.
Now, yeah.
And I love that. I think it's a great business model. This other company had kind of that idea, but they also launched, but they never opened it up to the public. And so we had the direct to consumer to ourselves. And why they didn't, I think they were caught up in, again, well, how are you going to make money? Are you destroying the value by offering it for free? Stuff like that. And we just decided to ride the wave.
So obviously, when you launched it, this is what we call product market fit. So what ends up happening is that this happened with Facebook, right? When Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook, he couldn't keep the servers up either. So basically, just imagine this, like, you're like, because VCs are like, what do you have? You're like, oh, look at this, right? It's like, whoa, like, and it's like, what's that product market fit? It's like, I can't keep my servers up because people are hitting it so many times, right? So those are signals that VCs love, right? They're like, oh my God, we're onto something, right?
Yeah.
So obviously you guys were onto something. So tell us about that. So that's the beginning sort of MapQuest by accident. And so it's almost like an accidental pivot that you had to make, right? Because it's like, okay, we have maps, it's free, it's going to cannibalize what we're doing now, which is we're trying to sell it to companies for money. And so what did your big supporter, was it McNally, had said to you, like...
No. Well, Rand McNally, which was a competitor in the print map business, we went to them. They were one of the ones we went to early on and said, hey, how about partnering, investing some money in this, and this is the new thing. The internet's going to be, And they said, no, we're not. We're never gonna, we're never gonna offer our maps for free. They're too valuable. That's not going to happen. Not only that, when they offered to buy our company, and they did a valuation of our business. They valued our B2B business, at X, which was a pretty nice number, but it was X. And I said, well, what about the internet business, the MapQuest business? 0.
Oh, that's funny.
0.
That's tweetable. That's tweetable.
And then,
internet value 0.
And then, of course, when we went public, with our good friends, the investment bankers, they said, why don't you lose the B2B business so you could be a pureplay.com? Because we were not a pureplay.com.
Okay, wait. I'm going to get to there right now, but I want to get to beginning. So this product market fit, then you're like, okay, got to raise money.
Oh yeah.
You raised money at you flew over to San Diego. Oh, by the way, all this time, he's actually not in DC. Where were you?
Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Well, we started in DC, and we had an office in Falls Church, Virginia, but the mapping group of Donnelly so we formed a joint venture. That was, we kind of missed that. We formed a joint venture to bring this product to market, and then the joint venture, and Donnelly bought out kind of the rest of the joint venture and brought me into Donnelly. My partner kept spatial data sciences,
right.
but we bought the product.
Yep.
We had the product. So I was
Which is the MapQuest.
So
product, yep.
I was inside running this business inside of Donnelly.
Yeah.
And, you know, they basically wanted me to move up to Lancaster to run their whole mapping group. So I went up there and I did that.
So you had to hop on a plane from Lancaster to probably go to Dulles to go to Sand Hill. Like,
there's no airport in Lancaster.
there's no, okay, got it. But so it's funny because it's the guy from Lancaster that's raising money at Sand Hill Road, right? And it was a VC and you raised $3 million. $4 million, which you never spent. It just kind of sat in the bank.
Right. So we were profitable, you know, because of our B2B business, we were profitable. But this was before we launched MapQuest. We raised the money, and the first round was raised in '94. What the first round allowed us to do is allowed us to spin out of Donnelly. So we went back to being an independent company that was venture backed, and you know, we proved to them that we were profitable. And then, so when '96 came, and then we really needed the money to invest in the consumer stuff, you know, the VCs were, you know, in a good mood and, you know, felt confident and comfortable that we could actually, you know, pull it off.
So, so one of the questions I always like to ask is like, you know, when you know, I mean, I have 2 kids, right? And I remember one of the most important things with my kid was like, what are we gonna name it? You know, like so tell us about like, so how did you name MapQuest? It used to be called.
So that, well.
So what was it called? But like the product, what was the product? The product was always, you had to launch the product, but you didn't have a name. So how did you crowdsource? How did you come up with the name?
So yeah, we create, I mean, that is the most, to me, the technology, no brainer. The sales, no brainer. Naming something, that's really hard. That's really hard. Okay. So we decided we'd create a contest among our employees, and people submitted. And of course, the person who won, who came up with MapQuest, was not an employee. It was a wife of an employee who came up with it. And so we thought that was it. We were thinking of WebMapper. Yeah, that's a terrible name.
Yeah. Hey, can I WebMapper that? Was there other?
And we came up with the 50s, sort of the 1950s font style, and the you know, motel kind of imagery that our marketing, you know, people came up with.
And the reason why you didn't pick WebMapper is because wasn't the domain taken? So that's why.
I think it was. Actually, yeah, I think it was. You're right. Yeah, I think one of the big computer companies had it.
WebMapper. Okay, great. So, and then eventually, a couple of months when you guys did launch, MapQuest became one of the top 10 sites.
Oh yeah. At some points, we were 3rd or 4th or 5th most trafficked websites on the internet.
You won IPO in 1999.
Which just, you know, if I may say so, I mean, just shows sort of the level of latent demand for that kind of stuff. I mean, that just shows. And people said, well, you know, what are people going to use maps for all that time? And it's amazing, you know, there's so, you know, and of course today mapping is embedded in every, you know, I was just out here looking at the, you know, the scooters and all the sharing stuff and everything, depends on location and mapping, otherwise it couldn't exist.
The second wave happened, which was, you know, mobile.
That's right.
So mobile transform, location, I mean, you have to have a map on your mobile smartphone. Like, I don't know how else you would operate, right?
Well, so, there was a time when we didn't have maps on our mobiles. We talked into them.
So eventually went IPO in 1999. You were the first unicorn at an $800 million valuation. AOL bought you guys in 2000 for $1.1 billion. AOL at that time was worth, what, about 80 billion?
And it was just at the time that they merged with Time Warner.
Then they became a $150 billion company.
We had to actually wait until that deal was consummated.
Right. So let me ask you this. Did you think you were worth 1.1 billion at the time?
Well, yeah. I mean,
at the moment, like when you were there, you're like, God, they're going to sell it.
Well, first of all, we were worth 800 million, and then, you know, you know, because we had sort of, we were not a pure play, and we had two legs in 2 different sides of this. On the B2B side and you know, let's say the B2B side, where the metrics are based on some multiples of profit or EBITDA or even revenue. We weren't close to being worth 800 million or 1.1 billion, but on the consumer side, and where the multiples or the valuations are based more on, well, what's a user worth, what's a eyeball worth, what's we don't have subscribers, but our audience, what's the audience? Yeah, what's the audience worth? That's how you get to 1.1 billion. And I will tell you that AOL, from the day that MapQuest was acquired, they made the price that they paid was justified just based on the number of pages and the ads they stuck on those pages. They had so much ad inventory. AOL could not, didn't have enough page views to, take care of all the inventory to advertise. We had the opposite problem. We could never get enough advertisers.
So it was a perfect match.
Yes and no.
Demand versus.
Yes, from an advertising point of view, it was a perfect match. Yeah. For other things, it was not.
So let me up the question here, because you were talking about valuation and like how much is the audience worth. So what is your opinion about Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp for $22 billion in 2014?
Bargain.
You think it's a bargain? Okay. No?
I don't know if it's a bargain, but I think.
I mean, it's
Facebook,
$22 billion, and I think it was less than 200 employees.
Yeah, but Brian, I mean, what's Facebook's valuation? I mean, what percentage did they? You look at it on a percentage basis.
Excluding Facebook's valuation, do you think just WhatsApp?
No.
Okay.
Would it be worth, as an independent company? Well, actually, it would be because people like Facebook would value it that highly. I mean, Facebook, they're looking out 5 or 10 years. They're seeing their trends like this. They need to find things that are, going to keep them going. I mean, the Instagram acquisition was I think,
that's $1 billion.
Really smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they got a deal.
They got a deal. Yeah.
Because now that's like killing Snapchat, which is $10 billion.
Well, they bought it so early, right?
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you another question. What do you think about Microsoft acquisition of LinkedIn for $26 billion?
Same thing. I mean, Microsoft even more. I mean, they're desperate. What has Microsoft done on the internet that's been successful? I mean, from at the level of a Google or an Apple.
As long as there's a buyer.
They've lost the operating system on the mobile device. So yes.
As long as there's a buyer desperate, then it's worth it because someone wants to buy it for that much, right?
Well, yeah, but it has to be something that they can see. We all, Microsoft's sweet spot. They've now, I think, realized with certainly with the new management is, B2B and business is still their kind of sweet spot, other than Xbox and stuff like that. But they LinkedIn. I mean, business. It's done through networks now. I mean, through networks, and they need to be there. And LinkedIn is the leader. If you're going to buy someone, the leader is worth a lot.
Okay. So I got the ultimate valuation question because I wanted to, because you're the original unicorn.
Are you looking for stock picks? Is that it?
Okay. So what do you think about this? And I always have discussions about this. WeWork.
Oh.
Wait, hold on. WeWork. Boston Properties. Okay, so Boston Properties, if you look at Boston Properties, they own skyscrapers, right? They own the freaking building, right? It's like the Prudential Center, the whole Reston Town Center, that's Boston Properties, okay? They own 40 skyscrapers.
Right.
WeWork doesn't own shit, right? They don't own any property. They don't own it. They just just rent.
Right.
So WeWork is worth $35 billion. Boston Property is only worth $20 billion.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think about it in the same way that I think about how many cars does Uber own. It's actually, in terms of business models today, it's better to have a platform and make money without owning assets, really, or employees, and just having a machine that turns out money. you know, without all the other stuff that drives down your
Capital
profit margin.
expenditure, like
Yeah,
take that out. Okay.
yeah. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of examples of that. Ultimately, we'll see. Because the issue is, you know, skyscrapers, if, you know, one of these smart entrepreneurs here starts something new, you know, potentially they could replace WeWork. It's hard to replace, you know, the people owning the skyscrapers,
Right.
because yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's a capital good. Unless, of course, you raise, you know, $500 million, you know, from investors, then you can go buy the skyscrapers if you need to.
Right. No, I feel like there's like so much there's so much focus on the oligopolies, the Facebook, the Twitter, Google's, the Amazon of the world, because they're worth so much money,
Yeah.
and it's like if they're willing to buy you, that, you know, they're trying to get over the $1 trillion. You know, if they become a $2 trillion company, well, it's like, well, they bought you at 20 billion, which is worth the money, because that's how the creative and that's all the stuff, that's how they are able to increase their value. But now, if you look at this, I know that Steve Case had said, you know, some of the valuations are so ridiculous that when they go IPO, it's like a down round.
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, again, Uber is worth $72 billion. I'm looking at some of the publicly traded companies that are not Facebook,
Right.
Google, like the FANGs or whatever. You know, Square, 35 billion. Okay, arguably that makes sense because they're making billions. But Twitter, 22 billion.
Yeah.
Right? So if they were private, would they still be 22? Probably a little bit more, maybe. Dropbox, 10 billion. Right?
Yeah.
Snapchat, 8 billion. If they were private, they'll probably be worth a lot more.
Right.
So Steve Case is right. Like, it's a down round, and there's a lot. The private market's flush with cash.
That could be true. That could be true. You know, it's always been sort of the opposite, because the public markets, you know, like in the dot-com days, you know, they get real frothy, and, you know, it becomes a selling spree, and driving the prices up. But I think, you know, today there are such big buyers out there willing to pay huge valuations that, you know, you could be right for a private. If they went to sell to, I mean, Snapchat, I mean, they could sell that for
Right.
a premium over that, their, you know,
There's a
their valuation.
stock pick recommendation? Double down on that. All right, so before I open up for a Q&A, there's one more question I want to ask, and that's basically like the mapping industry, because the thing is, I feel like that's still, that's kind of like the last frontier for the Googles of the world and Apple. They're sort of like you know, you saw Uber, they went from Mapbox to Google Maps, and then Apple's like, well, I have our maps as well, and now it's like almost that search is becoming maps. So like, I'm doing it myself. I'm like, every time I need like an oil change, I like go to Google Maps and I write oil change.
Right.
I don't go to the
Yeah,
Google.
I do that too.
And I'll do that, and then I'll see on the map, and it's like, oh, there's a coupon here. And I'm like, oh, click, right? So is that kind of how you see like how search kind of plays itself, especially when it comes to hyper local searching, or, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that's something we tried to sell way back in the day. We tried to say, hey, Map's a great way to search for, you know, local services and products and stuff like that, and it still is. And, you know, Google, of course, has a very, very, you know, almost insurmountable position because of their position in search. But there are a lot of challenges out there. You know, of course, self-driving is you know, there's so much going on in that space, and not just self-driving, but connected vehicles. You know, basically vehicles having the intelligence to, you know, be able to kind of make decisions about not only routes, but how fast to go, when to turn, what to do, you know, to make them a lot more efficient. Stuff that's going on the freight side, on moving goods, and not just people, all the sharing stuff, mobility as a service, which is a big thing right now. I mean, this is actually a great time. Not to mention, you know, what's going on, of course, with AI and bringing that into kind of mapping and location. There's a lot going on.
So there's a bunch of startups in this room. They're working on innovative stuff. You would suggest, again, like trucking. That's one angle for.
Well, your question, you know, about the big behemoths out there. I mean, Google. You know, if someone says, "Hey, I'm going to be the next Google Maps," I mean, you better have a really, really good story. I mean, that's, they have 1,000 people, continuously innovating on their mapping. But as Google's very clear about saying, they're focused on the mass market. They want to leverage their huge bank of servers, and they're not interested in niche markets and doing something specific for a market. And I mentioned I've been working in the freight transportation and supply chain industry, and Google doesn't really have a solution for that market. They have kind of a baby step solution because that kind of meets needs of a lot of people. But for anyone really looking at it in detail, Google's not the answer there. And that's true in many, many other niches. We talked about recreation, outdoor travel, stuff like that. And the same with, basic map data. I mean, yes, the basic roads, everyone, we know where the roads are. We know even today the signs and the speed limits. But there's a lot of other information out there that we don't have, having accurate information on businesses and what their specials are, what products are on the shelf in different locations. Can you search and find, by product name and brand name things? Is that tied to inventory systems? There's still a ways to go.
So like really micro detail, almost real time?
Yeah.
Location?
Yeah, and I guess probably the most important thing is, which relates to self-driving and all that stuff, is quote, the Internet of Everything or Internet of Things. With sensors all over the place, of course there are drones, but all your phones are sensors. There are sensors, there are sensors in your vending machine and your refrigerator and everywhere. Bringing that all together, making that make sense for people's and companies' decision making, exploiting the data. There's a lot of room for innovation and creating value that I think you can stand on the shoulder of the giants, as they say, exploit what Google has if you can. Don't reinvent their wheel just to do the same kind of thing, but build on top of it or next to it or whatever. There's a lot to be done.
So we actually ran out of time for Q&A.
Sorry.
No. So I have two last questions.
Oh.
They can.
You're taking the Q&A?
Well, no. So, yeah. Because we try to keep it under an hour because we're taping this, and so.
Yeah.
But anyways, so the last two. You can do the Q&A, when afterwards. Answer individual questions. But here's my last two questions, and we always ask these two questions to all of our speakers.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Number one is, what if you could rewind time 30 years from now, and then you are sitting in the audience watching a really badass entrepreneur, what would you have wanted to tell yourself? Like, what kind of advice would have heard?
Well, I think the main thing is just keep plugging. I mean, there are bumps in the road. If you, are really kind of have that, you're convinced that, what you're doing, makes sense. And you've got to be open to input and everything. But once you're convinced of that, don't let anyone, I kind of, and probably people did tell me this, but it's hard to, to have that sink in. If there's some bump in the road, just, adjust, but keep going towards your goal. That's, I think, a lesson, I learned. And being in those couple different companies really helped teach me that lesson.
Sounds like a trip mapping.
Well, everything to me is, yeah.
It's a map, okay. Okay, the last question, and probably the most important question.
Uh-oh.
Who's your favorite superhero or historical figure and why?
Who's my favorite superhero or historical?
You can do historical.
I can do historical. Yeah. My favorite superhero used to be Superman. I mean, I was a DC Comics person, but I think, of course, there's Confucius and there's Jesus and people like that, right? But I'd say, I really have always admired Mark Twain.
Okay.
And I know maybe it's a little controversial because of some of the words he used in his books, but you know, he was a guy who, you know, is funny, smart, looked at convention, but, you know, was able to kind of look at the hypocriticalness of a lot of convention. He was an inventor. He had a bunch of patents. He failed in business, but kept going. He fell in love with a woman based on a picture he saw of her and said, I'm going to marry that woman. She turned him down when he proposed, and he wrote her like 150 letters over like a period of 6 months or a year or whatever, and finally got her to turn around, and, you know, they were married for whatever, 35 years after that. So he had that stick-to-itiveness, and, you know, I just liked him. Oh, and of course, he was a traveler, and you know, he was interested in mapping and geography, and so yeah, it just all fits.
Well, thank you for coming to Star Ground, ladies and gentlemen. Barry Glick.